Before respect became optional in Hollywood, one legend learned it the hard way from another. This is the story of how Robert De Niro's public attack on Clint Eastwood backfired so spectacularly that it changed both their legacies forever. Your time is up, old man. Robert De Niro's mockery on live television cut through the studio like a blade, stunning everyone present. He was attacking Clint Eastwood directly, calling him outdated, saying he was a relic of Hollywood's past. The audience laughed and applauded, but none of them knew what Clint was about to do, because he had spent 57 years learning when to stay silent. And now it was time to speak. The Lincoln Center Theater was buzzing with anticipation on that crisp October evening in 1987. The American Film Institute's tribute to cinema legends was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of Hollywood's most respected names coming together to honor the art of filmmaking. The guest list read, like a who's who of entertainment royalty, directors, producers, and actors who had shaped American cinema for decades. Clint Eastwood arrived at exactly 7:30 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start. He wore a simple black tuxedo, no flashy accessories, no entourage trailing behind him. Just a man who had learned long ago that true confidence doesn't need an announcement. He moved through the crowd with the same measured pace that had defined his screen presence, unhurried, observant, present without demanding attention. Robert De Niro was already holding court near the bar, surrounded by a circle of admirers and fellow method actors. His voice carried across the room as he gestured animatedly, discussing his latest role preparation. At 44, De Niro was at the height of his powers, fresh off The Untouchables, and riding a wave of critical acclaim that had established him as the premier actor of his generation. He believed deeply in his craft, in the transformative power of method acting, and in the evolution of cinema beyond what he saw as the simplistic heroes of Hollywood's past. The tension between the two men wasn't new. For years, De Niro had made pointed comments about actors who, in his view, played themselves rather than disappearing into roles. He saw Clint's minimalist approach as lazy, his iconic characters as variations on a single theme. Some people mistake presence for acting, he had told Variety just months earlier, though he hadn't mentioned Clint by name. Everyone in Hollywood knew exactly who he meant. Clint, for his part, had remained characteristically silent about the criticism. He had heard the whispers, read the subtle digs in interviews, but had chosen not to engage. His philosophy was simple: let the work speak for itself. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air crackled with the kind of tension that made veteran Hollywood observers lean forward in their seats. The event's producers had made what they thought was an inspired decision. Rather than separate presentations, they would host a panel discussion featuring several generations of actors. The format was designed to showcase the evolution of American acting, with representatives from different eras sharing their perspectives. What they hadn't anticipated was how quickly admiration could turn into confrontation when fundamental philosophies collided in front of a live audience and rolling cameras. The panel began cordially enough. Moderator James Lipton introduced each participant with appropriate reverence, and the initial questions focused on craft, inspiration, and the future of cinema. Clint answered his questions with typical brevity, his responses thoughtful but economical. De Niro, by contrast, expanded on every topic, diving deep into the psychological aspects of character development and the importance of complete transformation. The shift came when Lipton asked about the difference between movie stars and actors. It was meant to be a general discussion about celebrity versus craft, but De Niro saw an opportunity he had been waiting for. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes finding Clint across the semicircle of participants. "There's a fundamental difference," De Niro began, his New York accent sharpening with conviction, "between actors who disappear into roles and those who simply show up as themselves with different costumes." The audience stirred, sensing the deliberate provocation. Real acting requires vulnerability, transformation, the willingness to completely abandon yourself for the truth of the character. Clint remained impassive, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. De Niro wasn't finished. "Some people have built entire careers on squinting and looking tough. That's not acting, that's branding. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the audience. Lipton tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but De Niro was committed to his course. The industry has evolved beyond the strong, silent type, he continued, his voice growing more pointed. Audiences today want depth, complexity, real emotional honesty, not just, he gestured vaguely in Clint's direction, the same stoic facade over and over again. The silence that followed was deafening. Camera operators instinctively tightened their shots, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Fellow panelists shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. In the audience, Hollywood veterans exchanged glances, recognizing that this had moved far beyond professional disagreement into personal territory. Clint sat perfectly still throughout the attack, his hands resting calmly on the arms of his chair. His expression revealed nothing, no anger, no hurt, no defensiveness. To the casual observer, he might have been listening to a weather report, but there was something in his stillness that felt different from his usual calm. It was the stillness of a man who had just decided something important. De Niro, perhaps interpreting the silence as capitulation, pressed his advantage. "Your time is up, old man," he said with a slight smirk. "Hollywood has moved beyond cowboys and vigilantes. We need actors who can actually act." The immediate aftermath of De Niro's attack revealed the deep divisions within Hollywood's elite. The Lincoln Center audience, packed with industry insiders, critics, and film enthusiasts, didn't know how to respond. Some applauded, caught up in De Niro's passionate advocacy for method acting. Others sat in stunned silence, recognizing that they had just witnessed something that crossed the line from professional critique into personal humiliation. In the front row, Martin Scorsese, De Niro's frequent collaborator, looked visibly uncomfortable. He had worked with both men and understood the complexity of their different approaches to acting. Nearby, Meryl Streep, who had mastered both method and classical techniques, watched with the keen eye of someone who recognized the stakes of this moment for the industry as a whole. The younger actors in attendance seemed energized by De Niro's bold stance. They represented a generation that had grown up studying at the actor's studio, immersing themselves in Stanislavski's teachings and believing that true artistry required complete psychological transformation. To them, De Niro was defending the integrity of their craft against the old guard simplistic approach. But the veterans told a different story. These were men and women who had worked with Clint, who had witnessed his professionalism, his preparation, and his instinctive understanding of what the camera captured. They knew that his minimalism wasn't laziness but discipline, that his restraint came from strength rather than limitation. Their faces showed not approval of De Niro's boldness, but concern about where this confrontation might lead. James Lipton, the evening's moderator, found himself in an impossible position. His show had built a reputation for respectful, in-depth conversations about craft. This public attack threatened to turn his carefully curated event into a spectacle. He cleared his throat, preparing to redirect the conversation, but something in Clint's posture made him pause. The television cameras captured every moment with ruthless clarity. The wide shots showed the panel's collective discomfort, while close-ups revealed the individual reactions. De Niro's satisfied expression, Clint's enigmatic calm, and the mixture of fascination and horror on the faces of their peers. In television control rooms across the country, producers recognized they were witnessing television gold, the kind of unscripted drama that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. What none of them could have predicted was how completely the dynamic was about to shift. Because while De Niro had been building his case for modern acting, Clint had been preparing his response. Not a speech, not a rebuttal, but something far more devastating. A demonstration of exactly why he had become a legend while others had merely become actors. The silence stretched for exactly 12 seconds. In television time, 12 seconds feels like an eternity. Cameras held steady on Clint's face as he absorbed De Niro's attack with the same impassive expression that had made him famous. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward in his chair. The leather creaked softly, a sound picked up by the sensitive microphones and transmitted to millions of viewers. When Clint finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that the entire theater instinctively leaned forward to catch every word. "Bob," he said. And just the way he said the name, not Robert, not Mr. De Niro, but Bob, somehow diminished everything that had come before. "You've spent a lot of words tonight talking about acting." He paused, not for dramatic effect, but because he was choosing his next words with the precision of a surgeon selecting the right instrument. "But acting isn't about words, it's about truth. And the truth is..." Another pause, this one deadly in its timing. "You just spent 5 minutes proving you don't understand the difference between performing and being." The shift in the room was immediate and palpable. The audience, which moments before had been divided between amusement and discomfort, now sat in absolute attention. Even De Niro's confident smirk began to fade as he realized that Clint's response wasn't going to be the defensive stammering he had expected. Clint continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, but somehow filling the enormous theater. "You talk about transformation like it's something you put on and take off. But real strength doesn't need costumes. Real power doesn't need volume." His eyes found De Niro's across the stage. "And real men don't need to tear others down to build themselves up." The silence that followed was different from the one that had preceded it. This wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of an audience waiting for someone to respond to an attack. This was the profound silence of people witnessing something rare, a master craftsman demonstrating his art without seeming to try. De Niro opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For perhaps the first time in his career, the man who had built his reputation on having something to say found himself speechless. The confidence that had carried him through the attack had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he had severely underestimated his opponent. Clint wasn't finished. "You called me old, Bob. You're probably right. But age teaches you something that all the method acting in the world can't: when to speak and when not to. Tonight, you forgot that lesson." He leaned back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man who had said exactly what he intended to say. "That's the difference between us." The immediate aftermath of Clint's response was unlike anything the Lincoln Center had ever witnessed. The audience erupted not in polite applause, but in something approaching a standing ovation. It started with the veterans, the directors and actors who had worked with Clint and knew the depth of preparation and professionalism behind his seemingly effortless performances. They rose to their feet with the kind of respect reserved for moments of genuine artistry. But it wasn't just the old guard. Younger actors, many of whom had initially sided with De Niro's passionate defense of method acting, found themselves applauding as well. They recognized that they had just witnessed a masterclass in the very thing De Niro claimed Clint couldn't do: complete character control, perfect timing, and the kind of presence that couldn't be taught or learned, only earned through decades of honest work. De Niro remained seated, his face cycling through a complex series of emotions: anger, embarrassment, confusion, and finally, something approaching respect. He had come to the evening prepared to publicly humiliate an actor he saw as representing everything outdated about Hollywood. Instead, he had been quietly, efficiently, and devastatingly dismantled by a man who had turned restraint into an art form. James Lipton, recognizing that no words could improve upon what had just occurred, made the wise decision to call for intermission. As the audience filed out for drinks and hurried conversations, the buzz was electric. Everyone understood they had witnessed something special, a moment that would be dissected and discussed for years to come. In the backstage area, the reaction was more subdued, but no less significant. Fellow actors approached Clint not with congratulations, but with nods of acknowledgement. These were professionals who understood that what they had just seen wasn't showmanship, but craftsmanship of the highest order. Clint had proven his point not by talking about acting, but by demonstrating it. De Niro, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated as the intermission progressed. The cluster of admirers who had surrounded him earlier had dissipated, replaced by a few awkward conversations, and several people who seemed to be avoiding eye contact altogether. His attack on Clint, which had seemed so righteous and necessary just minutes earlier, now felt petty and misguided. When the evening resumed, the dynamic had completely shifted. The panel discussion continued, but the energy was different. Clint answered the remaining questions with his characteristic brevity, but now his minimalism seemed profound rather than limited. De Niro, by contrast, appeared to struggle with every response, second-guessing himself in a way that was painful to watch. The lesson was clear. In a town built on performance, authentic presence still reigned supreme. The Lincoln Center incident became Hollywood legend, but not in the way Robert De Niro had intended. In the weeks and months that followed, the footage would be replayed countless times, studied in film schools and referenced in articles about the art of screen presence. What emerged wasn't a validation of one acting philosophy over another, but a reminder that true mastery transcends technique. For De Niro, the aftermath was professionally humbling. His attempt to publicly diminish Clint had backfired so completely that it raised questions about his judgment and character. Industry insiders began to whisper about ego overtaking artistry, about a great actor who had confused passion with wisdom. While his career certainly didn't end, the incident marked a turning point in how he was perceived by peers and the public alike. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew both men well. De Niro, for all his talk about transformation and disappearing into roles, had revealed himself most completely in that moment of attack. His hunger for validation, his need to prove himself superior, his willingness to humiliate a colleague, all of it had been laid bare by his own words. Clint, meanwhile, had demonstrated the very qualities that made his screen characters so compelling: quiet strength, unshakable confidence, and the wisdom to know when action was called for. In later interviews, Clint was characteristically gracious about the incident. "Bob's a fine actor," he would say when asked about that night. "Sometimes passion gets the better of good sense. We've all been there." It was exactly the kind of response that further cemented his reputation for class and professionalism, while subtly highlighting the contrast between his behavior and De Niro's. The broader lesson of that evening extended far beyond Hollywood. In an industry and a culture increasingly dominated by volume and spectacle, Clint Eastwood had reminded everyone that quiet confidence still carried more weight than loud insecurity. He had proven that you don't need to tear others down to build yourself up, that true strength doesn't require the diminishment of others. Years later, film historians would mark the Lincoln Center confrontation as a pivotal moment in Hollywood's understanding of what constitutes real screen presence. It wasn't about method versus classical, old school versus new school. It was about authenticity versus performance, substance versus style, and the timeless appeal of a man who knew who he was and didn't need anyone else's permission to be it. The most telling detail? 20 years later, when both men were asked about their most memorable career moments, only one of them mentioned that night at Lincoln Center, and it wasn't the one who had started the fight. Have you ever witnessed someone's quiet dignity triumph over loud aggression? Share your story in the comments below.
Don't forget to hit the like button if you liked the video and subscribe if you want videos like this to come. See you in the next story.